The girl lay on the wet grass in the rain, her life fading from the wound in her chest. The man stared into the void, realizing that his actions had led to the death of the one he had sworn to protect. Bending over the body in the middle of the rain, the traveler froze in despair, feeling the weight of equipment and grief. Tears rolled down the bearded man's face as he realized that this nightmare was repeating itself for the 99th time. The warrior sat beside the dead woman in the misty forest, his figure expressing exhaustion after numerous attempts to change the ending. Rising with determination, the man reached for his weapon, realizing that he had one last attempt to break the circle. Clinging to the elusive chance, he prepared his equipment and begged Demi to trust him at the crucial moment. With eyes glowing with blue light, the hero vowed not to let his companion down and to protect her at the cost of his life. Waking up in a cold sweat, the young man stood frozen, his face and breathing betraying visions of death. Sitting in the semi-darkness, the young man watched in shock the news about the sudden appearance of monsters on the city streets. The world instantly turned into a nightmare as the streets became overrun with creatures, leaving no chance for people to escape. The worried daughter entered the room and asked her father what in the news had scared him so much. The girl walked down the dark corridor, reminding herself that their main goal now was simply to survive. The man held the dying Demi close and begged her to wake up, afraid of being left alone in the destroyed world. Looking at his silent companion, the hero admitted that man was powerless against the chaos brought by the creatures of darkness. Staring into the void, he realized with the calm of a doomed man that their life had come to a tragic end. At a fateful moment, the last connecting thread of fate broke, plunging the world into impenetrable darkness. A divine figure appeared before the man, whose radiance promised to put an end to his torment in the cycles. The goddess told him to cast aside despair, granting him another chance to return and make things right. Awakening from the nightmare, the young man gasped for air, his pupils reflecting the horror of the cycle of death he had experienced. The young man lay in bed, looking at the number 99 that appeared above his head after waking up. Jumping out of bed, the hero felt his body in a daze, not understanding how he remained alive after the horror. The young man tried to make sense of the floating numbers, an ominous omen or a gift to save his daughter. Looking into the mirror, the young man studied the sign above himself, trying to unravel the rules of the new reality. The man clenched his fists, determined to fight to the end despite the fear of the unknown. The hero pounded on the door of Demi's room, demanding that she open it and get ready to escape the city. A sleepy girl came out to meet him, grumbling at her father and not understanding the reason for his strange behavior. The father grabbed his daughter by the shoulders and peered into her face while she asked if it was a nightmare. The man clutched his daughter's hand, afraid that movement would turn this moment into a memory of her death. Drawing Demi along with him, the hero ordered her to put aside her questions. It was more important to take her away from the impending threat. The man took his daughter out of the house, ignoring her requests, realizing that there was no time left for talking. Turning around, the father shouted that delay was tantamount to death and demanded unquestioning obedience. The hero's heart sank when the face of a monster appeared from the darkness, ready to tear them apart. A scream of horror cut through the silence as the father woke up in bed, realizing the failure of his attempt to save the child. The man tried to stop shaking and cope with the shock of returning to the moment before the disaster. Noticing the number 98, the hero realized with horror that the chances of saving his daughter were becoming less and less. The father's face twisted as he confirmed that the counter was keeping an accurate count of the remaining attempts. Sitting on the bed, he realized that life had turned into a game where the stake was the child's future. The man clenched his fists, feeling the burden of responsibility for every mistake that deprived him of the chance to fix everything. The blow shattered the monster's skull into pieces, starting a new battle between a father and his daughter in a mad world. Wielding a bat among the bodies, the father protected his daughter, putting her survival above his own life. Hiding behind the car from the monsters, the man understood that for the sake of the child, he would have to become ruthless. Looking at his frightened daughter, the father promised to do the impossible to rescue her from the clutches of death. Surrounded by creatures, the hero tried to throw them off, feeling his hopes of success slipping away. Clutching the knife, the man prepared for the worst, realizing that only strength could save his loved ones. While fighting zombies, the father realized that his life limit was dwindling, leaving less and less room for error. The man crushed the skulls of monsters, unleashing his rage in an endless battle for the right to exist. The hero destroyed enemies until the counter approached the critical point, after which oblivion followed. Standing among the ruins with his bloodied weapon, the father looked around the carnage, realizing how little time was left. Putting his strength into the blow, the man fought his way through the horde, driven by the goal of saving his daughter. The man stood among the mountains of corpses in the rays of the sunset, looking with hatred at the bloody bat and cursing his fate. Staring into the distance with an empty gaze, the father realized that even thousands of attempts could be in vain in this endless hell. With a heavy heart, the hero tried to escape from the disfigured body of his daughter, who had turned into one of the bloodthirsty creatures. Hearing the ghostly whisper of a child behind him, pleading for salvation, the man froze, torn apart by unbearable pain. The monster that had once been his child grinned furiously and reached out to him, killing his father's last hope for a miracle. In a last-ditch effort, the father hugged his infected daughter tightly, deciding that this was the only way he could show his belated concern. Putting a gun to his temple and hugging his daughter, the man considered their shared death the only way to end their suffering. He squeezed his eyes shut in unbearable grief, and let a tear roll down his face, preparing to pull the trigger and end this cycle. The man's eyes flew open and he felt a wet mark on his cheek, realizing with a shudder that death had not been a release. The exhausted father lay in bed, staring at the ceiling in silent despair that his hell had started all over again. Sitting up in bed in the pre-dawn light, the father realized that fate had returned him to the starting point of this nightmare. A single tear rolled down his cheek as he felt the full weight of his terrible burden with a pain in his heart. Noticing her father's strange behavior, the awakened daughter inquired about the reasons for such an early and frightening awakening. The girl entered the room and with sleepy anxiety asked why he was making noise in the middle of the night and what had upset him so much. Clutching his gear resolutely, the man looked grimly at his daughter, preparing to protect her life at any cost in the new cycle. Shocked by her father's sudden transformation, the girl froze in a daze, not recognizing her parent in this stern man. Looking at her with tenderness and hidden rage, the hero swore to himself that this time he would not allow the tragedy to repeat itself. His hand trembled in an impulse to touch his daughter, trying to make sure that she was truly close and safe. The man frantically hugged the child, putting all his despair and timid hope of salvation into the embrace. Closing his eyes from the overwhelming emotions, the father silently prayed to the heavens that the meeting would not be their last warm moment. The father looked at his daughter with stern tenderness and made an unbreakable vow that he would make every effort to save her. Holding the child tightly in the silence of the night, the man promised to survive and protect her, no matter how many tries it took. The hero whispered words of comfort, putting into them all his love and determination to overcome any obstacles in their path. Looking into his daughter's eyes, the father desperately demanded her complete trust, hoping that together they could cheat death. Touching the frightened girl's face with trepidation, the man tried to remember her alive, before fate separated them again. Remembering his past failures, the warrior saw himself from the outside, when, with a broken heart, he carried the lifeless body of a child in his arms. Looking around the city that stretched out into the distance, the survivor realized with bitter relief that he had finally found the right path. National Army soldiers vigilantly guarded the perimeter of the safe zone, giving the exhausted people hope of salvation. Within the walls of the university hospital, medical staff fought tirelessly to save the lives of those lucky enough to escape the chaos. Looking at the children playing peacefully, the man dreamed with bated breath that this peace would become a reality for his daughter too. An elderly man in a wheelchair looked sadly at the sunset-lit city, remembering the years spent in a safe place. Arriving at the memorial 40 years later, the old man spoke tenderly to his daughter's grave, lamenting her long wait. Bending over the tombstone with a bouquet of flowers, the hero realized with alarm that he had one last chance to change everything. Looking at the white lilies, the man felt a firm confidence in his decision, realizing that he now knew the right path. A look of humble calm crossed the old man's face as he imagined that he and his daughter would no longer have to run. With a bitter smile, holding a gun to his head, the man promised his daughter that he would soon take her away and they would be reunited. Silently closing his eyes and plunging into the darkness, the hero prepared to jump into the past, hoping for the success of the attempt. Finding himself back home with his daughter, the father exhaled heavily, trying to stop shaking and cope with relief. The man gave Demi a short, piercing look, shuddering at the realization of the horror they were about to endure. Noticing the serious expression on his daughter's face, the father focused grimly on his goal, vowing to protect her at any cost. With a shudder in his heart, the father carried his daughter's lifeless body in his arms, realizing that his attempt to save her had failed. Bending over Demi in the pouring rain, the man fell into a black despair, blaming himself for not being able to protect her. Remembering 40 years of agonizing training and hundreds of plans, the father prepared with grim determination to snatch her life from death. With a sinking heart, he touched the door handle, realizing that beyond the threshold the decisive battle against fate was beginning. Entering the room, the hero firmly promised himself that this time he would not make a single mistake, and would save his daughter's life. Standing frozen in the doorway, the father watched in dismay as the horror unfolded right before his eyes. The city streets turned into an endless sea of the living dead, and this sight inspired a primal fear in the man. The father's focused gaze expressed his readiness to go to the end, despite the fact that the situation was becoming hopeless. Looking at the hordes of monsters, he realized with horror that years of preparation were powerless against this variable. Shocked by the chaos he saw, the man froze in place, feeling the icy cold of panic paralyze his movements. Looking back at his past attempts, the hero realized with horror that in 99 cycles he had never encountered such a development of events. An unstoppable wave of bloodthirsty monsters poured into the streets, turning the city into a bloody mess and leaving no chance to maneuver. The distorted faces of the creatures, full of a mad thirst for flesh, filled the entire space, instilling in the father a chilling fear for his daughter. Trapped on the threshold, the man realized with despair that the only fact he was sure of turned out to be a lie. The shocked father stood frozen in shock as dozens of bony hands reached for his face, preparing to rip it apart in front of Demi. The man was stunned, because his experience told him that silence, not a crowd of zombies, should have awaited them behind that door. Noticing the mortal danger, the girl screamed a warning to her father in horror, begging him to come to his senses and protect himself from the monster's attack. Gathering the last of his willpower, the man jerked his daughter into the room, trying to shield her from the horde and win at least a chance of salvation. Demi fell to the floor with a scream, while her father remained in the doorway, becoming a living shield between the child and the bloodthirsty creatures. With an expression of unbearable pain and mournful determination, the man began to close the door, cutting himself off from his daughter for the sake of her future. The daughter sank to the floor in horror, unable to take her eyes off the door behind which her father was preparing to accept his final battle. Looking through the narrow gap, the girl watched with bated breath as her protector voluntarily went to certain death. Overcome with unbearable despair, Demi screamed into the void, realizing that her familiar world was finally collapsing right now. In a last attempt to escape loneliness, the girl reached for the door, silently begging her father not to leave her alone in hell. The girl frantically pounded on the locked door and tearfully begged her father to let her in immediately, refusing to accept his sacrifice. The crowd of bloodthirsty dead finally surrounded the man's figure, while he, with the last of his strength, held back the horde for the sake of his daughter's future. The hero's face was distorted by inhuman pain, as the monsters began to tear him to pieces alive in front of the locked girl. Losing consciousness from the pain, the father bitterly realized that the endless grief of losing a child in past cycles was more unbearable than death. Burning with grief, Demi sobbed loudly, and felt her heart breaking into pieces for the 100th time due to the inevitable loss. Finding himself buried under a pile of rotting bodies, the warrior summed up with chilling calm that this terrible agony had long been familiar to him. Little Demi smiled carefree in her cradle, not yet suspecting the harsh trials that fate had in store for her. The young and still hopeful father looked at his daughter with undisguised tenderness, promising himself to become a reliable support for her. Gently stroking the crying baby, the man calmed her in a quiet whisper, trying to protect her tiny world from any worries. The grown-up Demi pressed herself against the glass in horror, sobbing from helplessness at the sight of her father, who sacrificed himself to save her. The hero's face, covered in blood and marked with the seal of endless battles. Finding herself in the clutches of the monsters, the girl shuddered as she realized the futility of their struggle and wondered if this death would be final. Gathering the remnants of his will into a powerful surge, the warrior crushed the enemies surrounding him, refusing to accept defeat in this endless cycle. Crushed by the weight of dozens of living dead bodies, the man continued to struggle. Gritting his teeth in rage, the hero mentally swore that he would not die here, even if he had to return from oblivion 1,000 times. Tormented by the monsters, the father let out a cry of pain and rage, claiming that his suffering did not matter as long as his daughter's heart was beating. The hero cried out in a frenzy that even after his own death he was obliged to find a way to save his daughter from a terrible fate. Surrounded by the bodies of his fallen enemies, the man stood firm in defense of the only path that could lead him to Demi. One of the mutilated dead men, his clothes torn, continued his blind and inexorable movement. The zombie let out a deafening scream in which there was nothing human left, only an endless thirst for flesh and destruction. With inhuman speed, the hero rushed through the crowd of monsters, turning into a blurry shadow. In the very epicenter of chaos, the man struck down his enemies one after another, not giving them the slightest chance to block his path to his daughter. Having grabbed hold of another enemy, the warrior ignored the mortal danger and continued his furious fight. Seized by a mad rage, the hero himself became like a monster, and with a wild grin, bit into the flesh of the enemy, wanting victory at any cost. Rising above the torn remains, the man let out a guttural roar that drowned out even the groans of the dead surrounding him. With one powerful blow, the warrior crushed another obstacle, putting into this movement all the pain he had accumulated over hundreds of cycles. With incredible force, he tossed the monsters high into the air, clearing a path for himself under the cold light of the full moon. Every movement of the hero was filled with crushing power, causing enemies to fly in different directions from his furious attacks. The horde of the living dead continued to advance, filling the night city with their nightmarish screams and gnashing of teeth. Shrouded in a frightening blue glow, the father stood frozen before the crowd of enemies, demonstrating his readiness to become an indestructible shield for Demi. His body, wounded and covered in blood, radiated otherworldly energy. The monsters, in a frenzy, crowded each other, emitting piercing, grinding laughter and anticipating the imminent reprisal against the survivors. At this time, Demi, exhausted from fear and tears, pressed herself against the door in complete solitude, hoping for a miracle. Suddenly the lock clicked, and a blinding light burst through a narrow crack into the dark room, bringing long-awaited salvation. The girl looked up with disbelief and timid hope, unable to believe that the nightmare could finally end. The father, who appeared on the threshold, his appearance inspiring both horror and awe, gently urged his daughter to cast aside all her worries. The exhausted father, his face frozen in a mask of determination, vowed to protect his daughter until the very end, regardless of the deaths around him. The hero examined his scars and turned anxiously to Demi, wanting to make sure that the girl had not been harmed during the recent skirmish. An oppressive silence hangs over the darkened Mapo district of Seoul, foreshadowing further horrors to come in the chaos-ridden city. The massive walls of the A-Mart shopping center loomed before the travelers, transforming into a semblance of an ominous fortified fortress. The soldier on duty was enraged by the surprise, and rudely demanded to know what the hell was going on in that place. Shielding his daughter, the father calmly faced the barrels of machine guns, and the soldier's incredulous question about who they really were. The guards eyed the man suspiciously, wondering how he had survived on the streets teeming with hordes of hungry and dangerous dead. The enraged soldier threatened the hero with violence if he did not immediately break his silence and answer all the questions. Looking closely at the stranger's features, the soldier felt a chill run down his skin, and asked with concern what was wrong with his face. The soldier's eyes widened in horror as he realized the terrifying truth behind the survivor's appearance. Maintaining an icy calm, the man in glasses silently straightened up, demonstrating confidence and a hidden threat to everyone. The guard mockingly suggested that he was facing an arrogant star, since the alien remained silent even at gunpoint. Captain Chahi Yeri interrupted the squabble with an authoritative gesture, and dryly ordered the strangers to leave, not listening to any excuses. The head of the Great Tiger Squad announced a lack of space and advised the heroes to seek refuge in any other area of the city. Coming close, the woman angrily asked if the stranger had gone deaf, and again ordered him to leave the area immediately. Noticing something strange in the man's appearance, the captain suddenly hesitated, and her anger gave way to genuine bewilderment. In utter despair, the father begged for help, saying that his daughter had been wandering for a week and was suffering from increasingly severe asthma attacks. With his hands folded in a pleading gesture, the man tearfully asked to let at least the girl in if there was no room inside for himself. Captain Chahi Yeri silently studied the father, whose willingness to sacrifice himself for his child had sparked a fleeting interest in her. The woman's face contorted with tension as she realized the gravity of the situation and saw before her a man at the very edge. Unmoved by the pleas, the soldier called his father a crazy degenerate and demanded that this pathetic spectacle be stopped immediately. The subordinate mockingly asked the captain if she would really believe another sob story from this ordinary tramp. To everyone's surprise, the stern warrior could not contain her emotions, and sobbing, allowed tears of compassion to flow down her cheeks. Through her sobs, Chahi Yeri gave the squad a sharp order to let the aliens through, not wanting to listen to any further objections. Hiding her weakness, the captain irritably declared a shortage of people and ordered the heroes to wipe their noses before entering the base. As she left, the woman hid her confusion, leaving the guards completely bewildered by the sudden change in her furious anger to mercy. The father, still not believing in success, watched his savior go, feeling the burden of despair finally slipping off his shoulders. Looking after the warrior, the hero smiled faintly, noting that the captain remained the same person as before. The image of a strong female soldier who had managed to unite the survivors and create this safe haven appeared before my eyes. Despite his reputation as a cold snake, The captain's heart was moved by the father's sacrifice for the life of his own child. Demi screamed her father's name in horror, unable to hide her shock at the abruptly changed situation and the new mortal threat. The girl indignantly noted that everything was not going according to plan, while her father feverishly searched for the right words to justify himself. The armed soldier rudely ordered them to follow, ignoring the painful coughing of little Dami, who was terrified to death. Sharply pushing the girl, the soldier asked irritably whether she was thinking of making fun of him at such a critical moment. Sensing his daughter's weakness, the father hugged her tightly, trying to become a reliable support and protect her from the hostile environment. The man realized with alarm that Demi's sanity was fading too quickly, and without rest, she would soon find herself in mortal danger. Nightmares came to mind, when the daughter, overcome with despair, cried, seeing a loved one turn into a terrible monster. Filled with determination, the father reflected on his power after the bite, allowing him to destroy enemies single-handedly. Looking at the shopping center, the hero noted to himself that this building was the best point for long and successful survival. Assessing the facade, the father emphasized that here they would find not only valuable supplies, but also the only organized defense. Looking at the cold bulk of the buildings, the father assured himself with a gloomy hope that his daughter would finally be completely safe. The puzzled ally pointed to the ruins and noted that the accuracy of the prediction of the collapse made the visitor from the future seem credible. The soldier, his eyes stern, sank into his memories, telling of the unimaginable nightmare that had happened 3 days ago. The focused warrior kept up a steady fire on the monsters, trying to hold back the advance of the huge and furious horde. Looking at the hands of the dead, the soldier explained that the captain had lured the monsters deeper into the building to save all the other people. While the survivors slid along the ropes to the neighboring building, the shooters on the roof covered them, realizing the importance of every second. A crowd of bloodthirsty creatures filled the trap, unaware that the captain was already ready to activate the explosives planted in the walls. The blinding flash of the explosion engulfed the enemies, turning the formidable threat into flaming debris and flying pieces of flesh. Looking with disdain at the rubble, the soldier expressed hope that the surviving creatures were now buried alive under the heavy concrete. The fighter turned sharply at the rustle and froze in amazement, discovering his father appearing in the midst of the smoking ruins strewn with bodies. A man in sunglasses calmly observes what is happening, hiding the burden of hundreds of lives lived. The soldier, with a grin, sarcastically asked his interlocutor why he was looking at him so intently. Not realizing the scale of the threat, the soldier grinned confidently, confident that the dead would not escape from the rubble. A giant zombie emerged from the thick smoke behind the fighter, turning the man into a tiny target. The monster's rotten face with red eyes was frozen in a terrible grin, foreshadowing a cruel reprisal for the witnesses. The soldier stood frozen in shock, realizing what an indescribably huge monster was looming right behind him. The giant beast raised its massive fist, preparing to unleash its full might on those who stood in its way. The impact shook the ground, and the girl in tactical uniform rushed away, desperately saving her life. The warrior looked around in horror, realizing that she had only a split second left before death. The girl jumped to the side as the monster's fist crushed the concrete beneath her feet with a roar. The soldiers screamed in horror, unable to understand how a mountain of flesh could have appeared on their positions. While Demi and her father were escaping, the warrior covered them with her body, raising her weapon to meet the new threat. With a distorted face, the girl ordered all units to immediately open heavy fire on the monster. The fighters poured lead on the monster, trying to stop its inexorable advance with furious and continuous bursts of automatic fire. A hail of bullets pierced the giant's body, but the monster continued to stand, despite the intense fire. The enraged monster opened its rotten mouth wide and let out a roar full of primal bloodlust. The colossal creature advanced on the line of soldiers, who were horrified to realize the uselessness of their light weapons. With one powerful lunge, the zombie struck, turning the entire space in front of him into a pile of ruins. The fallen fighter screamed in despair from fear, realizing that his defenses had been breached and there was no salvation. The giant's shadow completely engulfed the fallen soldier as the monster closed in for a crushing blow. The paw grabbed the fighter's backpack, but the brave warrior managed to tear it from its deadly grip. The girl shook her subordinate violently and demanded that he come to his senses, threatening him with death for his dangerous slowness. Chahi Yeri tried to concentrate, realizing that the current disaster scenario was very different from the previous ones. Looking at the giant, the warrior noted that in front of them was not an ordinary zombie, but a powerful creature. In the heat of battle, the warrior ordered all survivors to immediately retreat to the store building for shelter. When the father tried to speak, the girl rudely told him to be quiet and run without wasting a second. The hero and his daughter rushed away from the chaos, feeling the icy breath of death of the enemy behind them. The man's cold gaze behind his glasses revealed his complete readiness to take decisive action. The father lunged towards the monster, deciding to divert attention to himself and save his daughter. The man brought down a powerful fist on the enemy, shrouded in a bright flash of mysterious blue energy as he struck. The barricades at the entrance became their last hope, as the girl decided to lure the enraged monster into a trap. Cha-Hee-Yeri believed that the creature would not break through the defense if its weak spot was found in time. The girl rushed quickly through the darkness to the position, hoping that there would be enough time for this maneuver. Standing frozen in front of the doors, the warrior watched in confusion as she watched the crowd of people on the first floor of the building. The sight of civilians made her despair, because they should have left the danger zone earlier. The warrior changed her plan of action on the fly, trying to protect everyone trapped at any cost. Raising her machine gun, the girl ordered the soldiers to lead the survivors away, deciding to become bait for the huge monster herself. Demi looked at the warrior with concern, trying to comprehend the scale of the mortal danger that threatened them all. Noticing the girl alone, Cha-Hee-Yeri anxiously asked where her father was at the moment. The protector's face twisted with anger as she asked Demi if her father had chickened out. The girl pointed decisively at the battle, and countered that her father continued to selflessly protect everyone. The warrior turned around in amazement, not believing that someone had decided on such a reckless and heroic step. Cha-Hee-Yeri's eyes reflected shock at the incredible physical strength demonstrated by the mysterious man. The hero's crushing blow crushed the monster into the ground, causing a powerful burst of energy that scattered debris around. The giant's body disappeared in a blinding flash and clouds of dust, marking the end of this furious battle. The man froze with his fists clasped, breathing heavily and trying to stop himself from shaking from the strain. A stunned Cha-Hee-Yeri watched as the monster her squad had thought was an absolutely invincible enemy fell. The man quickly closed the little girl's eyes, trying to protect her psyche from the terrible sights of war. With a deep sigh of relief, the father leaned over the enemy's carcass, feeling the adrenaline leave him. The warrior took aim at the man, demanding an explanation for his frightening and clearly inhuman strength. The warrior lowered her weapon and sincerely apologized for the unfair suspicions of the hero's cowardice. The man confessed to Demi that he had broken his promise and put their shared plan in danger. While calming his daughter, the father admitted that he acted solely out of fear for her life. Ryu Min-sok stood motionless under the gun, waiting for the stunned warrior's response. Cha-Hee-Yeri once again demanded that the hero immediately confess who he really is. The exhausted man straightened up, ready to accept any consequences of his sudden revelation. The hero said his name, causing everyone around him to hold their breath in amazement. Demi watched with excitement as her father's true role was revealed to the people around her. The girl begged her father to remain silent, fearing that she would become their main target in the bloody chaos. The man confirmed his status as an expert by finally changing the rules of survival in this endless cycle. The heroes froze, realizing that the rules of this deadly game had just changed irrevocably. Cha-Hee-Yeri questioned the man's status after seeing his incredible strength in battle. Ryu Min-seok explained that he had been studying the habits and vulnerabilities of monsters since the beginning of the rebellion. The man expressed his joy at the help and offered the warrior further cooperation in the future. The warrior laughed, acknowledging the clarity of the situation despite the suspicion that remained in her eyes. The girl grabbed the hero by the collar, demanding that he eliminate any lies or ambiguity. Cha-Hee-Yeri commanded Demi to remain silent until these important negotiations were fully concluded. The girl noted that the hero defeated the bulletproof monster with his bare hands. The warrior noticed a scarlet gleam in the man's eyes, reminiscent of the gaze of the bloodthirsty monsters themselves. Coming close, she asked Min-seok in an icy tone if he was still human at all. The policewoman sarcastically asked what she should do now with the expert's crazy idea. Min-seok explained that she had defeated a monster that was completely indifferent to regular bullets. The young man noticed the scarlet eyes of the stranger, similar to the eyes of those disgusting dead creatures. Ryu Min-seok coldly asked the woman if she still considered herself human. He answered no, emphasizing the complete futility of the shots fired in this difficult situation. The policewoman listened to Min-seok explain that he had only delivered the finishing blow. The young man explained that this monster was a powerful devourer, born from the fusion of two zombies. He added that the creature's massive jaw is its most important and vulnerable point. Min-seok hinted at the effectiveness of a heavy hammer strike to this particular part of the head. The young man replied that the genetics of such creatures was just an insignificant, minor detail for him. The hero explained that he hid his abilities precisely because of the suspicious and harsh looks of those around him. The man sadly asked the girl not to call him a dangerous monster out loud. The irritated warrior could barely restrain the desire to hit this suspiciously calm and confident man. Chahi muttered that this man and the whole situation seemed extremely suspicious to her. Demi defended her father, and the warrior admitted that a zombie would not have been so selfless in saving his daughter. The onlookers froze as the tension between the leaders reached its breaking point in front of everyone. The girl told everyone to go inside for the safety of the survivors and frightened civilians. The warrior warned the expert that from now on she would not take her gaze off him. The girl's face became a mask, hiding her anxiety about this man's role in their fate. Chahi understood the price of victory and the full weight of the long struggle for life that lay ahead. The companions ran up to the warrior, anxiously asking if she had been wounded in the fight. A sudden, powerful blow threw one of the soldiers several meters to the side. The woman recalled the obligation of civilians to obey the military in emergency situations in the city. The father objected. Without his decisive action, all the people in this store could have died. The policewoman warned that if the mistake was repeated, she would kill the culprits herself, not the zombies. The soldier shouted in panic, demanding an immediate retreat in accordance with the order he had previously received from the captain. The fighter desperately asked everyone to step back, but the captain responded with only silence. At the shopping center, survivors thanked God in horror for their miraculous rescue. Sitting among the crowd, Demi asked her father in bewilderment about the chaos happening around her. He admitted with relief that it was good that she had not been identified at that very dangerous moment. The girl asked how her father managed to lie so masterfully, and he replied that his opponent easily fell for his bluff. The heroes looked at each other in bewilderment at the question of acquaintance, trying not to reveal the depth of their true connection. The man cited a premonition, recalling bloody visions from past cycles of survival in this world. When her father asked who taught her the word bluff, Demi pointed to him with complete confidence. Looking at his daughter, the hero was convinced that this was the same girl from his endless time loops. Recalling the evenings around the campfire, the father admitted that it was Demi who taught him a lot over the years. The man told his daughter to wait, promising to return soon with food, and hiding the anxiety growing inside him. The girl looked at her father with a suspicious gaze, trying to figure out the reason for his strange behavior and sad smile. The father cast a determined glance at Demi, confirming his readiness to sacrifice everything again to save his daughter. Clutching his white glasses, the hero mentally called upon his promise, preparing for a new test in a cruel reality. Demi told her father that he should not reveal the truth because of the danger of his sudden exposure. She reminded him that people could hurt him, her voice shaking with concern for her father. Demi asked her father to keep their secret, recognizing the enormous burden of responsibility that fell on their shoulders. A father and daughter sat among the survivors, preparing for a simple meal amid the bloody chaos. The father warned his daughter that if people found out the truth, there would be uncontrollable panic in the shopping center. With a basket of provisions, he silently walked past the people, sensing the approaching storm of terrible events. The father promised to return soon, trying to maintain absolute composure in the face of a new deadly threat. Demi lay exhausted while her father gathered supplies in preparation for the dangerous journey outside. The man sat down next to his daughter, trying not to attract unnecessary attention from the people around them. He looked up, wondering painfully why things had gone differently this time. The hero realized that zombies were coming in waves and evolving faster than in all previous cycles. Bending over his daughter, the father reflected on the mutations of enemies he had not encountered in 99 lifetimes. The man tried to understand what exactly had triggered such radical and frightening changes. The survivor admitted to himself that he already had a frightening guess about the nature of these changes. The Night City has become a trap, hiding new life forms born from this terrible apocalypse. A creature with pink eyes emerged from the darkness, embodying the power of a new, terrifying threat. Under the moonlight, the mutant froze. The hero felt that the creature was driven only by the instinct to kill. The father realized that every creature of darkness was obsessed with the desire to bring death to him and his little daughter. The man wondered if the monsters were hindered by their own survival, or if they were driven only by an eternal thirst for fear. Faced with the furious grin of yet another creature of chaos, the survivor finally realized one frightening truth. The father resolutely admitted that he was also fickle to his enemies and could become a threat. He calmly assessed the scale of the disaster, wondering if zombies from all over the area had gathered here. The father stood under the night sky with a sword and declared that he would no longer look for enemies. While some voices discussed what was happening, others called for immediate action without wasting a second. The father gripped his sword, knowing he had to finish the job before his daughter woke up. With cold determination, he declared a purge, preparing to deal mercilessly with the zombie horde. The man charged into the crowd of dead, his sword slicing through their flesh in a deadly dance. The zombies' bodies were scattered under the blows of the blade, and blood sprayed like fountains in the thick darkness of the night. He continued the attack, his movements flawless and honed by decades of repeating this nightmare. Father Demi plunged his sword into the monsters with incredible speed, remaining impassive in the midst of the bloody carnage. The hero clenched his fist with hatred, concentrating in it the rage accumulated over hundreds of cycles of battles. In a flash of energy, the father unleashed a blow, causing the earth to shake with his power and determination. Facing an army of multi-armed mutants, the man prepared for battle under the pale glow of the cold moon. From the purple flames, monsters gazed out, their eyes expressing only a primal thirst for murder and destruction. The warrior struck across with his axes, and a powerful wave instantly scattered the monsters in different directions. Taking a defensive stance amidst the lightning bolts, the hero prepared to attack, challenging fate itself in the forest. Showing his steadfastness, the father gripped his axes, ready to become a human shield to save little Dami. The horde of creatures surged forward in a single stream of flesh, seeking to instantly tear the survivor apart. The multi-armed monster rushed at the man, stretching out its limbs to destroy its main target. Illuminated by the light, the hero leaped towards the enemy, turning the fall into an act of righteous revenge. A zombie with glowing red eyes pounced on Dami's father, its twisted, flesh-hungry mouth wide open. Father Demi cut the monster in half with a powerful swing of his sword, and streams of blood instantly gushed into the thick darkness of the night. Demi woke up abruptly in a yellow blanket, her body still shaking from the nightmares she had experienced that terrible night. The girl opened her eyes with an expression of alarm, trying to comprehend where she was now and what exactly had happened. Demi stretched with relief, realizing that she had finally woken up after a heavy and exhausting sleep in chaos. She turned around abruptly at the rustling sound behind her, her wary gaze expressing a complete lack of understanding of what was happening around her. The father handed his daughter a plate of food with a warm smile and gently asked if she had finally woken up after a long sleep. There was a delicious portion of food with a cute heart made of rice on the plate, and the father calmly suggested to his daughter to eat it quickly. Her father, with a slight grin, noted that Demi was probably hungry, trying to lighten the mood a little. Demi sat silently in the circle of survivors, her distant gaze filled with deep and unspoken bitterness. Demi smiled tenderly, her gaze radiating genuine kindness, making one forget for a moment about the nightmare they had just experienced. Stopping outside Chahiyeri's office, someone indignantly asked if the other person didn't believe the situation was truly serious. An agitated soldier reported to the captain that a rather loud and inexplicable noise had been heard in the area during the night. Intelligence provided shocking data. Absolutely all zombies in the surrounding area had been destroyed by someone. The captain slammed the table in anger and screamed that it was impossible and suggested that the monsters had killed each other. Scratching his ear in confusion, the subordinate admitted that he himself did not believe it until he saw it with his own eyes. The captain was stunned to realize that hundreds of zombies had been killed in just 4 hours and demanded an urgent explanation. As she studied the report, the woman's anger gave way to determination, realizing that a force more terrifying than any virus had appeared in the area. Turning to the soldier, the commander ordered that all the people be gathered immediately, ignoring his obvious surprise. With a blazing gaze, the captain announced an urgent evacuation, not wanting to waste another second in this place. The man, looking stunned, uttered a short exclamation, realizing the scale of what had happened, and dryly confirmed the truth. Someone noticed with obvious relief that the monsters were no longer visible, looking around the empty streets of the dark city. The survivors anxiously asked each other about the disappearance of the zombies, retelling the overheard conversations of the soldiers. The crowd of people joyfully shouted that the zombies had finally left, and they were now completely safe from the deadly threat. Demi called out to her father among the cheering crowd, hoping that the zombies were truly gone and the nightmare was finally over. The father carefully placed the yellow cap on his daughter, this movement serving as a silent warning of something important. He sternly ordered Demi to listen carefully, and under no circumstances take off that cap in the future. Demi asked again, puzzled, why later? Not understanding the hidden meaning in her father's words at that moment. Soldiers with a megaphone led the crowd of survivors toward the exit of the building, directing people in a single, organized flow. The officer announced through a megaphone that all the zombies had disappeared this morning for an unknown reason, and this was a confirmed fact. The crowd erupted in joyful shouts upon learning of the rescue, and the opportunity to finally leave this dangerous refuge. The female officer announced through a megaphone that they were leaving the area immediately, without giving them time to pack. 2 young men in the crowd wondered why they were leaving in such a hurry if all the zombies in the area had suddenly disappeared. The captain explained that before losing contact, they had been communicating with the elite infantry brigade that would become their new home. showing pictures of armored vehicles. She spoke of a battalion of survivors capable of providing protection and supplies. A group of dissatisfied people accused the commander of madness, not wanting to risk their lives for the sake of promises made 3 days ago. The captain confidently told the outraged citizens that she personally and very well knew the man with whom she was negotiating. Pointing to a warrior nicknamed Blue Falcon, the woman declared that she trusted this hero as much as she trusted herself. The crowd continued to be outraged, calling the evacuation a suicide and refusing to leave the more or less safe store. The captain insistently repeated that the zombies would definitely return, but the frightened people still demanded to stay. The man behind Demi's father admitted with relief that he had been expecting this development as he watched them. The military man called the decision emotional, and sarcastically asked whether a male captain would have made the same decision in her place. The policewoman angrily asked him if he had really said that, not believing the insult she had heard. Dami's father calmly and with absolute confidence declared to the crowd of survivors that the zombies would definitely return. The man in the cap aggressively asked the stranger who he was, since he was acting as if he knew absolutely everything in advance. Dami's father looked at the aggressive man in silence, the tension between them growing with every second of silence. He coldly warned that if people stayed here, they would be serving themselves up to the monsters on a silver platter as dinner. Father Dami added with grim determination that in this trap they would simply wait to die with no chance of rescue. The man in the cap panicked and asked what guarantee of survival they had if they decided to leave the shopping center. Father Dami coldly admitted that he couldn't guarantee anything, and sarcastically pointed to the empty chatter around him. The father asked the people to decide whether they were really ready to follow the military into the complete unknown. The hero asked the frightened people if they had enough strength to survive in this hell all alone. The crowd froze in front of the warriors, realizing the inevitability of the fateful choice that lay before them. One of the survivors supported Captain Cha, realizing that without the soldiers, they would turn into lifeless corpses. The man called on everyone to follow the soldiers, reminding them that it was they who had kept them alive until now. The men raised their fists, deciding to trust the captain and set off to meet their salvation. Captain Cha was amazed at how easily the stranger accomplished the seemingly impossible task. The heroine looked anxiously into the face of the mysterious man, trying to unravel the identity of their savior. The girl watched the blonde man, wondering if his character matched the strength he displayed. The man coldly asked not to thank him, surprised by such a violent reaction from people to his actions. Father Dami firmly admitted that he was used to persuading people in difficult situations. His voice sounded confident. The soldier stated that in this situation he had to protect not only himself, but also his little daughter. Dami's father shook the soldier's hand as a sign of mutual trust and agreement to further cooperation. He smiled and admitted his confidence that Captain Cha would handle the situation better than anyone else. The policewoman looked away silently, struggling with her inner doubts and her sense of duty. The military and Dami's father prepared to work together to urgently evacuate all survivors. The policewoman shouted into a megaphone that she had done everything possible to help people survive this nightmare. A convoy of trucks slowly carried people along the destroyed streets from the danger zone to safety. Demi sat on the bus, hiding her face under a cap so as not to reveal her true nature to those around her. The soldiers in the transport were tense, aware that mortal danger could return at any moment. Captain Cha led the column through the ruins, keeping an eye on the potentially dangerous dark alleys. As they passed the signs, people breathed a sigh of relief, hoping for the success of this risky maneuver. The woman noted the strangeness of returning to the Han River and ordered the driver to remain vigilant. The heroine said gloomily that everything they had experienced so far was only the beginning of their real test. The captain called out anxiously to Sergeant Shin, whose gaze betrayed the awareness of a new mortal threat. From behind the ruins, the dead poured out onto the road, quickly surrounding the transport of frightened people. The hungry monsters rushed to attack, trying to get to those who still retained the spark of life within them. Captain Cha gave the order, directing the civilians and their escort group to the right. While the fighters held their positions, everyone remembered that zombies' hearing was sharper than their sight, and any noise would be a death sentence. Hearing the metallic ringing, the horde of monsters instantly rushed towards the sound in search of new prey. The column raced along the road. Someone shouted that the plan had worked, and the zombies had indeed followed them. Captain Cha ordered them to keep their distance so that the dead wouldn't catch them. The engine roaring, drowning out the words. The soldier added that there were too many pursuers, and they would catch up with the convoy of trucks very quickly. Captain Cha ordered the column to urgently head to the Saksun Bridge, while there were too many enemies. From above, a massive bridge and pontoon crossing filled with crowds of frightened people were visible. Captain Cha whispered that it wasn't long now, and soon this nightmare would finally end for everyone. She realized with despair that the zombies would pursue living people without stopping or respite. The truck carrying the soldiers accelerated sharply, while one of the soldiers shouted an order to act immediately. The pontoon bridge swayed under the crowd as the survivors panicked and tried to cross to the other bank. The zombie roared and charged, its body moving with inhuman speed towards the soldiers on the bridge. A heavy truck rammed into a crowd of dead people, scattering their bodies and staining the asphalt with blood. From above, a destroyed bridge was visible, where panic was pushing people and zombies straight into the cold waters of the river. The shadows of the dead wandered among the ruins, turning the once living city into a silent night cemetery. With a wild cry, the monster rushed forward, preparing to tear apart anyone who stood in its way. It became clear that enemies were vulnerable from behind, which gave fighters a chance to successfully end the battle. The hero ordered the road roller to be put into operation, demanding that his comrades move at full speed. The machine began to move, turning the bones and flesh of its enemies into a bloody mess under its weight. The observer called this technique the king of the battlefield for its effectiveness in destroying hordes of undead. The roller's shaft crunched as it ground the dead, leaving them no chance to continue to exist. The steel giant continued its harvest, leaving behind only the crushed remains of its enemies. A horde of zombies rushed towards the soldiers, forcing the hero to deliver swift and precise blows to the approaching undead squad. A military truck carrying soldiers braked sharply, driving through blood spatter on the asphalt and leaving a long dark trail behind it. The protagonist soared into the air and unleashed a powerful blow on the transport, instantly turning the durable military metal into a pile of fragments. A hard-eyed blonde man in blood-stained clothes calmly assessed the current situation amidst the heavy debris falling around him. The truck stopped at a traffic light in a quiet city block, where at that very moment a strange and deceptive calm still reigned. At that very moment, the grandmother and the young girl were sitting on the bus, completely unaware of the mortal threat approaching them. The girl in the cap suddenly looked up, realizing something extremely important for their continued survival in this endless bloody chaos. The man coldly explained that he had taken responsibility for it because no one else in the group could handle the task. The girl asked the soldier if he had noticed anything strange nearby, but he only looked indifferently in her direction and remained silent. The girl grabbed the phone tensely, having received a message about the return of Captain Cha's team to the fortified military base. With a gentle smile, the blonde reassured his companion, assuring her that he had no intention of causing panic, but only wanted to help the soldiers. Turning to his father, the hero promised that he would not allow anyone to reveal their intentions or cause them any serious physical harm. Young Demi watched with hope as the rink retreated, where armed soldiers and their new mysterious ally had gathered. Captain Cha ordered the troops to take up positions behind her and prepared for a new attack, meeting with complete understanding from her subordinates. A group of monsters, led by a mutant, burst toward the column, causing even experienced fighters to feel the icy chill of intense and sudden anxiety. The construction equipment crashed into the ranks of the undead with a screech, literally grinding the enemies and not giving them a chance to launch another attack. The heroes directed the full force of the steel giant at the remnants of the horde, blocking the squad's path to their main and long-awaited final goal. From above, a line of vehicles could be seen confidently making their way through the rubble and mountains of fallen dead bodies on the destroyed highway. Despite the chaos, one of the soldiers uttered the commander's name with delight, acknowledging her undeniable leadership in this protracted and brutal battle. At sunset, the survivors saw the brigade's fortifications, realizing that they had finally managed to reach their destination in full force and alive. The hero thought about the infantry brigade, a point on the way to Dijon where his previous cycles of survival had invariably ended in complete failure. The man admitted with grim determination that he had reached this critical point in a record 8 days, despite all the obstacles that had arisen. The hero realized that he could not relax, because any mistake at this moment would only worsen their already extremely difficult and dangerous situation. In the vision, the little girl found herself in mortal danger, and at that moment her face was distorted by indescribable and very strong horror. One of the soldiers exhaled in exhaustion, saying that this entire endless nightmare of recent times had been incredibly difficult and exhausting for them. The hero remarked that he was glad to have a woman on the team, to which she coldly replied that they were ultimately their only saviors. The soldier asked the blonde man if he had worked in construction before, to which he replied that he had simply learned to survive when he knew too much. The hero expressed relief and joy that they were able to reach the desired location completely safe and sound. The man asked the woman with a smile what exactly she had said, and she sharply asked if he had been able to hear everything in the noise. The helmeted soldier angrily ordered them to be silent, watching the approaching figures carefully through his precise optical sight. Sergeant Li Yinghui informed the arriving heroes that their squad had been expecting some serious reinforcements for a very long time. The woman was told that her arrival had been reported in advance. Colonel Cha had confidently predicted her appearance in the camp on that very day. Hearing about the colonel, Captain Cha froze, realizing that all her actions had been calculated in advance and in detail by this superior officer. The sergeant added that the colonel had warned her about her stubborn nature and the inevitable scene she would definitely create immediately upon arrival. The heroine asked about the colonel's whereabouts, noticing how the faces of all the armed fighters standing in front of her suddenly darkened. She was pointed to the back gate, where the fate of the civilians in the locked bus was being decided, among whom was the frightened girl Demi. The news of the dead in the rear made the captain shudder, realizing the gravity of the threat hanging over the military base and its loved ones. The woman angrily asked if the colonel had really gone to the front lines alone without ensuring that he had combat support. When the sergeant confirmed her fears, she noted that at his age, such heroism could end truly fatally for him. Officer Li chuckled, implying that Colonel Cha's true strength and motives lay in something far more important to the success of their entire mission. The colonel set out alone into the unknown, completely unconcerned about the risks that lay in wait for him along the way. The warrior on the tower tensely counted down the last 35 minutes until that fateful and absolutely inevitable moment. The fighter glanced at his watch and declared with determination that there were only 27 seconds left before the fatal events at this base began. The colonel shouted with delight that this was a new record, watching the events below from his high watchtower. The hero confirmed that the axe was more reliable than the gun, after which he dealt a powerful, crushing, and final blow to his opponent. Colonel Cha Peng-ho of the 2nd Blue Falcon Brigade stood over his finally defeated and lifeless enemy with a look of grim triumph. The colonel laughingly demanded to use the weapon next time, mockingly asking the enemy if they had suffered much in the end. The commander mockingly ordered the soldiers to grow to his level, so that they could begin to see through their opponents in any combat conditions. The protagonist realized with cold calm how exactly these seasoned people behave in the conditions of a real and merciless battle. The colonel declared that the enemies were only hindering him, after which one of the soldiers firmly agreed with these unfair words. Stepping over mountains of bodies, the bearded warrior bitterly admitted that age was taking its toll, and his joints were no longer so strong. Looking over the battlefield, the commander spoke dismissively of the incompetent and expressed the hope of meeting a worthy enemy. Feeling the huge mutant behind him, the old veteran only chuckled briefly, maintaining complete composure. Turning to the monster, the warrior asked ironically if it was still clinging to life after such severe wounds. With a roar filling the base, the crippled one-armed monster prepared for a final attack on the imperturbable enemy. With a crunch, the multi-ton roller fell upon the remains of the enemy, turning them into a mess to the approving cries of the fighters. Watching the brutal battle, the stunned soldiers screamed in horror, unable to comprehend the madness that was unfolding. Clutching his axes at the watchtower, the veteran took up a fighting stance, demonstrating that actions speak louder than empty words. Looking at his companion, the fighter said, "Only by achieving mastery can one see through the true nature of enemies." Looking at the figure in the crimson aura, Colonel Cha warned the people with anticipation of a display of overwhelming force. The fair-haired man greeted Colonel Min Seok and asked him to bring the men along with Captain Cha Hee-bree. In the ominous red light, the father looked at the figure with the axe, looming over him like a huge, threatening shadow. The hero dodged the blow of the massive colonel, who fell to the ground with colossal destructive force. The soldiers screamed in panic, turning to the colonel and wondering how it was possible to attack peaceful civilians. The stunned soldier froze in shock, not understanding the essence of what was happening, and only confusedly asking again. A strong hand gripped a bloody axe, covered with nicks and marks from its countless recent victims. The man asked the colonel with concern how such a thing was even possible in their current unstable situation at the base. An order came from the tower to immediately raise the alarm, and for everyone present to urgently enter the interior. The hero, with an icy gaze, realized the frightening truth. The man standing before him was, in fact, a real monster. The father noticed the strange state of the enemy, noting that his eyes were not deceiving him, and that something was wrong with this matter. Hearing his name, Colonel Cha Peng-ho froze with a distorted face, not hiding his deep anxiety at all. Face to face, the colonel and the stranger exchanged glances as a piece of a weapon flew past. Having learned of the guest's intention to stay, the colonel watched him with interest, wanting to test each other's strength in battle. Looking at the broken steel, the officer admitted with cold calm that the time for diplomacy in this situation was over. In the midst of the ruins, Colonel Cha suggested to his opponent that they stop talking and move on to persuasion by force. Looking at the enemy, the colonel froze in anticipation of the fight. A shadow of excitement flashed across his face. Feeling a surge of strength, the hero clenched his fist in rage, preparing to unleash the energy of 100 cycles in one powerful blow. Shrouded in a dark aura, Dami's father looked defiantly at the officer, intending to prove his right to protect his daughter. With a grim glee, the colonel inquired about the stranger's readiness to fight, understanding the danger of the test. As he tightened the straps on his gloves, Colonel Cha admitted that in his entire career he had never met such crazy people. The hero acknowledged with a grin that his opponent had learned of his interest, after which the two fighters engaged in a fierce fight. The man in the blue glow asked with disdain if those around him really called him such nonsense. The hero coldly warned that they would now find out in practice, and launched a swift, powerful attack from above. A code red alert was issued across the base, requiring all civilians to immediately proceed to a fortified shelter. The soldiers, confused, asked again about the code, until the fighter promised to explain everything later and ordered them to follow the instructions. The stunned military man asked if it was really Captain Cha herself standing in front of him, and received a firm confirmation. The young soldier tried to ask the captain a question, but all the words simply got stuck in her throat from excitement. A dark-haired woman with a strong tension in her voice sharply asked those around her about what was happening at the base. The fighter reported that the monster attacked the colonel at the back gate, calling the monster by its real name. The shocked woman demanded an explanation about the monster, casually mentioning the name of the mysterious Ryu Min Seok. The soldiers surrounded the girl, insistently demanding to know what exactly their new mysterious savior had called himself. Under the heavy attention of the crowd, the survivors froze, painfully trying to understand who was hiding behind the mask of their hero. A frightened Demi looked anxiously into people's faces, feeling the growing tension and unpredictability of the moment. When Ryu Min Seok's name was called, there was silence, broken only by the echoes of the battle going on nearby. With a punch, the hero broke through Colonel Cha's defense, causing the old veteran to shudder from the inhuman power. Looking at the cracks in the wall, the observer was amazed at the force that could destroy solid stone with just one blow. Thrown back by the impulse, the colonel had difficulty maintaining his balance, but challenged his opponent to ask if he would insist. Enveloped in a fiery aura, the blonde rushed forward again, delivering a powerful blow that sent clods of earth flying. A heavy boot crashed into the concrete barrier with a loud thud, demonstrating the hero's determination to see the fight through to the end. The colonel's face contorted with tension and shock when he saw the enemy's eyes glowing crimson. The colonel, with a mad grin, was breathing heavily, his face expressing rage and readiness to continue this mortal battle. The protagonist quickly jumped back, dodging another devastating blow from his powerful opponent. The bearded warrior fell to his knees, exhausted from the crushing collision with the enemy at the gates of the military base. The colonel, his eyes blazing with blue flames, brought down a blow on his opponent, their faces coming close together in a furious fight. Both fighters stood in tense silence, slowly recovering from the grueling exchange of blows. The opponents met face to face at sunset, and the colonel mockingly asked if his opponent wanted to fool around some more. The soldier contemptuously assumed that his opponent had changed his mind about attacking, and had simply decided to surrender without further fighting. The hero calmly offered to repeat the duel under suitable conditions, using all his hidden power and skills. The fair-haired man with a cold gaze confidently noted that the colonel, despite his rage, was no longer a living person. The bearded warrior with bloody wounds froze in tension, gradually realizing the frightening meaning of the hero's words. The stunned colonel peered at the enemy, realizing that the initiative from the beginning of the battle did not belong to him at all. Observing the figure in the crimson aura, the officer felt a gap in his strength that could not be filled even by years of experience. Enraged by frustration, the veteran angrily demanded to know what exactly this powerful man was trying to achieve. Maintaining an icy calm, the hero told the colonel that now he only needed reliable protection for his people. Hearing the request from the warrior who had just defeated him, Colonel Cha suddenly burst into loud, sarcastic laughter. Through his laughter, the officer sarcastically asked why such a dangerous monster might need anyone's help. Abruptly cutting off the fun, the colonel changed his tone to a stern one and firmly refused, not wanting to take part in this venture. The protagonist only darkened and calmly explained that it was not he who needed reliable protection at the moment, but his daughter. Watching Captain Cha, the man clarified that the issue was primarily about the safety of little Ryu Demi at the base. With determination in his voice, the father pointed at the girl, firmly confirming that his only goal was to save his daughter's life. The protagonist promised to allow her and all the people who arrived with him to stay at the location of this infantry brigade. The colonel looked at the fair-haired adversary with bewilderment, still not understanding his true intentions and goals. The man resolutely agreed to do whatever was required of him if his opponent would do it for the sake of the people. The hero shouted furiously to the entire district that he would do everything possible for this squad for the safety of his loved ones. Dark night enveloped the base, with illuminated buildings and an empty basketball court under the cold moonlight. A large gymnasium was filled with civilians hoping to find shelter from the global catastrophe. One of the men cautiously asked his comrade if he had heard the news about the monster, and received only a hesitant nod in response. The girl noticed with concern that the news was full of strange reports, and someone mentioned the red eyes of zombies. A tied-up man in a dark room asked his captors with a bitter smile whether they were really talking about zombies. The prisoner, with a cold smile and an empty gaze, froze in heavy shackles, finally realizing the absurdity of the situation. The man, tightly bound with chains, heard the colonel's verdict that all the people who had arrived with him would be allowed to stay. The colonel pointed suspiciously at the hero, declaring that he could not trust a man who posed a threat to the detachment. With icy calm, the military commander announced the decision to immediately and completely isolate this dangerous guest from people. Having accepted the terms, Dami's father himself offered to lock him in solitary confinement in order to allay the mistrust of the base command. With grim determination, the hero mentally swore that he would make every effort to prove his rightness and usefulness. Sitting in the semi-darkness of a cramped cell, the man pondered how to convince the military of his safety for the sake of saving his daughter. Hearing a quiet rustling at the window, the prisoner suddenly shuddered in surprise and raised his head in amazement to the setting light. His daughter Demi's face suddenly appeared behind the bars, and with joyful triumph, she announced her appearance to her father. Approaching the window, the girl confirmed that she was fine, while her father looked with relief at her familiar features. Demi said the soldiers showed her kindness, and even allowed her to briefly visit her father, who was locked in a cell. A group of anxious people in the shelter discussed the events with apprehension, realizing that many people had gathered outside the base. The girl behind bars turned to the prisoner with alarm, quietly asking for forgiveness, to which he cautiously asked again. The prisoner promised to stay out of conflict, but immediately broke his word, and again approached the girl with a question. The father calmly remarked to his interlocutor that she was most likely very disappointed in him after what she had seen. The man abruptly slammed his fist on the iron bars of his cell, trying to attract the attention of his silent interlocutor. The prisoner bitterly admitted that if he had not been her father, these people and she herself would hardly have been safe. The prisoner added with a grim smile that they would have been taken out of there in any case, no matter what those around them said. The man, with a heavy and tired look, simply said that he sincerely believed her, despite the differences that had arisen. The girl joyfully exclaimed that it was time to go, and warned that roll call would soon begin, which she could not be late for. The dark-haired woman, with a slight smile, wished the prisoner good night and walked quickly towards the exit. With a gentle smile, the father tenderly wished Demi a good night's sleep, trying to convey a bit of peace through the bars. After saying goodbye, the girl quickly ran away from the walls of the prison block, hoping that the separation would not last long. Looking ahead with a timid glimmer of hope, young Demi smiled faintly at the thought of her imminent rescue. Chained in a cramped cell, the man watched his daughter with warm eyes, hiding his painful anxiety behind a mask of peace. For a moment the girl's face darkened with a look of bitter realization, but she immediately pulled herself together. Taking a sharp step to the side, the young heroine left the courtyard, feeling her soul growing heavier. A single drop of rain fell from the night sky and dissolved into a puddle with a quiet splash. Unable to bear the overwhelming emotions, Demi burst into tears, wiping her tears with her sleeve and trying in vain to stifle her sobs. Left completely alone and bound in fetters, the father hung his head dejectedly, immersed in gloomy thoughts about the future. Staring into space, the man replaced his softness with a stern determination, focusing on the goal of breaking the vicious cycle. Heavy boots slowly moved down the corridor, leaving behind a loud echo of footsteps. The tied-up man stood alone in the dark cell, quietly saying goodbye to Ryu Min-seok. 3 soldiers stood in front of the prisoner in an ominous blue light, and one of them said coldly that the colonel was waiting. Someone's hand pointed to a point on the map, marking the station that had become a nest for many survivors. The massive commander with a tablet explained that 20 minutes ago, sensors at the destroyed station had recorded numerous signals from survivors. The officer on the screen noted another strange, unknown frequency among all the signals. The military added that speed in completing the mission was crucial, and any delay would slow them down. The commander stated emphatically that this was why he was sending an elite team to carry out the mission. The bearded man pointed his finger at the chosen fighter with a confident smile. The fair-haired hero, accompanied by a soldier, heard how he was assigned to a mission. Colonel Cha, piercing the guest with a stern look, reminded him of his words. A father must be ready to make any sacrifice for his daughter. With a deafening ringing sound, the protagonist jerked his arms to the sides, and the heavy chains shattered into pieces. The stunned soldiers recoiled in horror as they watched the fragments of shackles rain down on the floor beneath the prisoner's feet. Demonstrating impressive strength and readiness for action, the man dryly inquired when the squad planned to begin moving out. A barely noticeable predatory grin played across Colonel Cha's face, betraying his satisfaction at meeting a worthy warrior. One of the officer's eyes flashed a frightening blue as he excitedly confirmed his readiness to begin the task immediately. Shrouded in dark shadows, the hero officially announced the start of the rescue operation, his eyes burning with a furious flame. A cold full moon rose over the silent ruins of the fallen metropolis, casting a ghostly light on the path of those who dared to defy death. Amid the twisted remains of buildings and rubble, an oppressive night silence reigned, heralding the beginning of a new dangerous stage. A small child in a baby jumpsuit with wide eyes timidly called out to his father. In the dark shelter, people whispered quietly, trying to soothe the crying baby in the tense silence. The young mother, in a panic, tried to console the child, and the man nearby noticed with irritation that the baby was making a lot of noise. The father of the family added with displeasure that the baby was screaming so loudly that it was becoming unbearable and irritating those around him. The older woman reproachfully reminded him that he was just a child, and that he couldn't behave any differently. The little boy looked at what was happening with wide eyes and clenched his fists. The father said the child's name with displeasure, trying to calm the situation, to which the mother responded with alarm. A young woman with a baby in her arms pressed tensely against the wall in a dark corner of the shelter. A mother and child sat alone in the shade, leaning against the cold wall and hugging their knees. From the darkness, a distorted face with a terrible grin looked at the woman. A creature with a glowing red eye and bared teeth stood frozen in absolute darkness, preparing to attack. The city's blue streets are teeming with crowds of the living dead, and the protagonist looks at the nightmare with cold indifference. A huge mutant with a single glowing red eye grins at the heroes, but father remains completely calm. A powerful truck crushes and tears apart a horde of zombies at full speed, while the hero puts all his rage into the breakthrough. Colonel Cha proudly praises the power of his truck to the man, and the hero only briefly confirms the commander's words. The heavy vehicle rushes through the crowd of enemies, and Colonel Cha emphasizes that speed is the only key to the success of the operation. Colonel Cha gestures to two variables and informs the hero of new complications in the plan. The heroes look at the subway entrance completely blocked by rubble, and realize that the only escape route is blocked. Colonel Cha points out the second critical problem on their way, and the hero is already looking for a way to remove the obstacle. Pointing at the tablet screen, Colonel Cha speaks angrily about hidden enemies. A glowing display shows that there are unknown creatures in the enclosed space with the survivors, and the man understands that the people are in a deadly trap. Colonel Cha demands immediate action, knowing that delay will destroy everyone in the sector. The protagonist studies data on a tablet, trying to anticipate threats and find weaknesses in the strategy. The screen shows the mines, the only safe route in the colonel's opinion for covert entry. The commander proposes a plan to escape through the tunnels, unaware of the dangerous mutation of the virus deep within them. The colonel demands confirmation of readiness, reminding them of their duty to save every survivor at any cost. The hero remains calm and abruptly interrupts the commander's enthusiasm with one short, firm refusal. The father predicts failure for the mission, realizing that the old methods no longer work in the new conditions. The shocked colonel tries to justify the plan, not understanding the reasons for his partner's confidence in failure. The commander is confused while the hero recalls his past mistakes, which always led to the same ending. The father notes that despite the colonel's experience, the number of people saved in previous cycles was minimal. The hero realizes that in similar rescue attempts in previous cycles, there were always 0 survivors. Dozens of people hang in cocoons from the ceiling, transformed by the predator into a living supply of provisions. The sight of multiple bodies in the web leaves witnesses wondering about the monstrous creator of this lair. The girl comes to her senses and, in shock, tries to understand how she ended up in this terrible place and where her friends are. Hanging upside down, she looks around the darkness in horror, realizing her helplessness among the captives. She calls out to Da-Yun, not realizing that in the monster's lair, any extra sound could cost her her life. The captive screams in horror and tries in vain to escape from the sticky, strong threads of the web. People on the floor rush to the fallen Da-Yun to find out if she is safe and can walk on. The man looks at Da-Yun in confusion as another captive demands to be released from the spider's shackles. There is chaos in the lair. People are looking for loved ones, not realizing the mortal threat hanging over them. The prisoner is outraged by the slowness of those around him and demands that he be immediately rescued from the trap. An old woman with scarlet eyes, whose movements are devoid of human features, silently crawls along the ceiling towards the people. The prisoner watches in a daze as a strange old woman approaches, whose behavior seems frightening to him. A woman with a crazy face asks about the reasons for their visit, and her eyes betray a hungry monster. The mutant suddenly pounces on the man and bites into his head, spraying blood across the room. Eyewitnesses demand that the massacre be stopped, but the monster no longer hears words or pleas for help. A bloody body falls to the floor in front of a group of people shocked by the brutality they witnessed. The murdered man instantly turns into a zombie and slowly rises, staring deadly at the living. Some are counting down while others watch in horror as their former neighbor mutates. The hysterical prisoner points to the living dead man and loudly screams about the appearance of a zombie. Bloody chaos erupts at the station. People flee while the living dead continue their hunt. People don't understand where the zombies came from and try to save themselves by running towards the exit without looking back. The girl rushes about looking for a way out, but discovers that all the passages are tightly blocked by cobwebs. Looking into the darkness, the captive realizes the coming of a nightmare in the form of a terrible and invincible monster. The survivors rush past the columns, trying to escape pursuit, while a huge web sways above them. The girl freezes in front of the stairs in confusion, feeling how fear paralyzes her movements. From above, they shout that the way is closed. People are trapped in a circle, alone with hungry monsters. The father furiously demands that his son hurry so that they don't get caught in the station's death trap. The boy shouts to his father about the danger, seeing an enemy approaching from behind, which he did not notice. Screams and sounds of struggle echo from the depths of the station, marking the beginning of the end for all trapped inside. The girl runs down the dark stairs, hoping to get to her friend Da-Yun's aid in time. Each step up the stairs is accompanied by her whisper, full of fear and determination to save her friend. She jumps up and down the steps, not feeling tired, thinking only about how to prevent tragedy. Once below, the captive freezes in mute horror before something so terrible that her scream dies down. Before her stands a colossal mutant spider, clutching a lifeless human body in its paws. Looking at the gigantic creature, the girl realizes the insignificance of her chances, and her will breaks. The mutant opens its mouth with scarlet eyes, filling the room with a wild and deafening roar. The girl looks at the monster with eyes wide with fear, realizing that this nightmare is real. Tears stream down her face as she stunned into denial, refusing to believe what was happening and whispering the impossible. Standing in front of the creature's face, she tries in vain to convince herself that all of this is an endless bad dream. A burst of fire engulfs the metro station, turning it into a blazing inferno and erasing all traces of chaos. The explosion shakes the vaults, releasing energy capable of destroying even a formidable mutant. Through the flames comes the scream of a monster whose flesh is melting from the extreme temperature. The girl falls to her knees among the rubble, her face distorted with pain and hopelessness. The hero reminds the colonel of the futility of rescue, since not a single life was saved. The father, in gloomy concentration, explains to his partner the reason for their constant failures. Ryu Min-seok prepares to demonstrate the power he has accumulated in his past lives. The hero, engulfed in flames, declares that an ordinary person cannot complete this mission. For the sake of his daughter, Ryu Min-seok stopped being human and turned into something else. The face of the flayer emerges from the fire, a new deadly force in this anomalous cycle. The hero explains to the spider that it hunts people, paralyzing them before dragging them into its web. The burning father sees the mutant copying human facial expressions, which only causes disgust. The monster attacks with a sticky web, but Ryu Min-seok notices the threat in time and reacts. The hero dodges and decides to burn the spider, knowing about its fear of high temperatures. With a crushing blow, father engages in a furious battle with the mutant, maintaining a cold determination. Having found the enemy's weak spot, the hero prepares for the finale, realizing his superiority. The hero's lunge tears through the spider's flesh, proving the father's determination to save his daughter at any cost. In a ring of fire, the mutant screams in pain, losing the ability to resist the man's strength. The hero swings for the final attack, and it's clear from his appearance that the monster's fate is sealed. Ryu Min-seok declares that he will finish the creature with one blow, using all his accumulated energy. The hero commanded the running woman to stop in the burning corridor. The distraught mother demands that the man not dare touch her daughter. A man assesses the threat and prepares for a mortal fight with a flaming enemy. The space shakes from the inhuman roar of the monster's needle-studded mouth. The fighter jumps and sends the burning creature flying with a powerful kick to buy time. In despair, the woman falls to her knees, stretching out her hands and praying for miraculous salvation. Her face is distorted with horror, and her gaze suggests that her mind does not accept what is happening. The hero lands on the floor as the monster's massive bulk approaches him from the left. The man barely maintains his balance in the heat, but with an effort of will he faces the danger. The fire giant looms over him, but the father, protecting someone else's life, shows no fear. The hero continues the battle in the flames, deftly maneuvering and dealing heavy blows to the mutant. Rising in the center of a fiery whirlwind, the man finds the strength for a decisive attack. The hero is determined to win this anomalous cycle for the sake of his daughter's future. The image of his daughter appears in the hero's mind, reminding him of her unwavering faith in him. Hearing his daughter's voice, the hero unleashes all his power on the mutant with renewed energy. The hero's powerful swing is capable of blowing to pieces any virus spawn. The father slams the monster into the concrete floor, causing deep cracks to spread throughout the station. The mutant lets out a dying cry, unable to resist the power of the man who changed his destiny. Looking into the enemy's mouth, the hero coldly intends to finish him off and save the survivors. A punch shatters the Ripper's head, confirming the man's status as the strongest. A crushing blow to the jaw causes a fountain of blood, marking a turning point in the fight. The monster loses its menacing appearance and whines pitifully, like a frightened child calling for its mother. The man tramples his enemy to the floor, interrupting his pleas and coldly declaring his mistake. The creature's face is distorted with pain, and its eyes show animalistic horror at the power of man. Bleeding, the huge carcass falls at the feet of the winner, losing its ability to resist. The mutant chokes on its own blood, producing hoarse sounds from its shattered throat. Pressing the enemy's head with his boot, the hero contemptuously calls the sound the creature makes a cry. Amid the flames, the man predicts that now different sounds will be heard from the monster's mouth. Bending over, the hero promises the enemy that from now on, he will only let out cries of pain. The creature lets out an agonizing scream that echoes throughout the burning corridor. The hero delivers the final blow, putting all his fury into it and giving the enemy no time to recover. The dead press themselves against the elevator glass with a hungry roar, bringing indescribable horror to the surviving people. A group of men desperately hold the heavy doors, trying to hold back the onslaught of the advancing horde of the dead. People understand that if the barrier collapses and the creatures break through, it will be their inevitable end. One of the guys noticed the strange silence of the zombies, but his comrade abruptly and rudely interrupted his thoughts. The man froze, his face distorted with shock, sensing the approach of a new, serious danger. The threat of fire was added to the siege of the dead, and the room quickly began to fill with acrid, suffocating smoke. The guy in the tie became hysterical, screaming that there was no way out and they were all doomed to a quick death. The man stopped the panicker and hopefully called out to the leader of the group, calling him father and waiting for commands. The man in the cap asked the panicker irritably if he felt any strange changes in the air. The pressure on the door disappeared, and the survivors timidly assumed that the monsters outside had stopped moving. The metal doors shattered from the impact, throwing people back in a powerful wave and destroying the defensive line. The survivors scream about the defense being breached, begging father to be extremely careful in the face of the new threat. The survivor's face twisted in confusion, as he tried to figure out who exactly had emerged from the clouds of dust. The group of rescued people stared in shock at the figure in front of them, not believing that this was their true savior. A large-scale night operation at the metro station became a ray of hope for those trapped. The Special Forces soldier turned sharply at the strange sound in the ruins, preparing for any surprise. The squad leader watched the successful progress of this crazy rescue mission with a predatory smile. At dawn, the results were announced. 37 people were saved from the death trap at the metro station. The soldiers could hardly believe that they had been able to evacuate so many people from the isolated dungeon. The officer froze in bewilderment, unable to rationally explain what he saw in the gloomy dungeons. A woman handed over a child to rescuers whose survival among zombies seemed like an impossible miracle. The child in the shining cocoon smiled serenely, becoming a symbol of hope in this bloody hell. Demi watched her father with pride and shock, recognizing in him the great and powerful savior. The crowd cheered, and the girl was amazed that her father was able to accomplish the impossible single-handedly. The hero in the white cloak on the armored vehicle looked like a true miracle worker in the eyes of all the rescued people. The officers were delighted with the success of the mission, admitting that the result had exceeded all their boldest predictions. The commander burst out laughing and announced that the hero had passed the test and proven his strength. The father stood silently to the side, considering the triumph merely a proper fulfillment of his duty to protect his family. Demi walked towards her father, feeling the tension of the endless nightmare finally receding. The hero looked at his daughter with a tired smile, allowing the mask of a ruthless warrior to finally disappear. Demi looked at her father with tears of admiration, seeing in him not just a parent, but the savior of the world. They merged into a tight embrace, realizing that their main personal mission had been successfully completed. A heavy anticipation of the consequences of the recent bloody battle reigned in the silence of the base's premises. The soldier worriedly informed the medic that the patient was coughing heavily and had still not regained consciousness. The doctor advised the patient to continue resting and promised to come back later with the necessary medications. The man lay in the semi-darkness with a bandage on his forehead, immersed in a deep sleep. Suddenly, the sleeping man's face was distorted into a terrible grimace.